Hello there, and welcome back to Sleepy Tin Foil Hat. Tonight, we are going to slowly drift back through time, far beyond the modern world, far beyond recorded history as we usually understand it, and into one of the most mysterious civilizations that has ever existed on this planet, ancient Egypt. There is something about Egypt that feels different from every other place in history. The monuments seem too large, the knowledge too precise, the stories too strange to fully belong to the ancient world we think we know. Massive stone temples aligned with the stars, perfectly cut blocks that still puzzle engineers today, symbols carved into walls that look less like decoration and more like messages left behind for someone who would come much later. For thousands of years, Egypt stood as one of the most advanced civilizations on Earth. Yet even now, with all our technology, satellites and computers, we still cannot explain how some of their greatest achievements were actually done. The deeper historians look, the more questions appear. And the more questions appear, the more it begins to feel like we might not be looking at the full story. Some researchers believe Egypt was not the beginning, but the continuation of something even older. Others believe knowledge may have been passed down from a lost civilization that existed long before the pyramids were built. And then there are the theories that suggest the Egyptians themselves may have understood things about the universe that modern science only recently started to rediscover. Tonight, we are not here to prove anything. We are simply going to explore, slowly, calmly, piece by piece, and let the mysteries speak for themselves. If you enjoy these quiet journeys into strange history, make sure to subscribe to Sleepy Tin Foil Hat and leave a comment telling me where you are listening from tonight. I always like seeing how far these late-night explorations travel, and it makes this strange little community feel a bit more real, even when we are talking about things that feel completely unreal. Now, take a slow breath, let your shoulders drop, let your eyes relax, and imagine the desert at night. The air is still, the sky is filled with stars, and somewhere in the distance, the pyramids stand in silence, exactly where they have stood for thousands of years. One of the first things that makes ancient Egypt feel different from other civilizations is the sense that it appeared already advanced. When historians look at most cultures, they can see a clear progression. Small villages become towns. Towns become cities. Knowledge grows slowly over time. Tools improve little by little. Writing systems evolve gradually. Architecture becomes more complex step by step. But Egypt does not always follow that pattern. Some of the earliest dynasties already show a level of organization, engineering, and astronomical understanding that seems unusually developed for such an early period. The Great Pyramid, for example, was built more than 4,000 years ago, yet it is aligned with incredible precision to the cardinal directions. The sides of the pyramid are almost perfectly square. The base is nearly level across an enormous area, and the stones were cut and placed with a level of accuracy that would be difficult even with modern equipment. Mainstream history explains this as the result of skilled workers, clever engineering, and many years of labor. And that may be true. But even with those explanations, there are still details that remain hard to fully understand. Some of the stones used in the pyramids weigh more than modern construction cranes can easily lift. The joints between certain blocks are so tight that you cannot slide a piece of paper between them. And inside the pyramids, there are chambers and passages arranged in ways that seem to follow mathematical patterns connected to the earth, the stars, and even the proportions of the planet itself. Because of this, some researchers have suggested that the pyramids may have had purposes beyond what we were taught in school. Not just tombs, but structures designed with knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and physics that may have been far more advanced than we usually imagine ancient people having. Another strange detail about Egypt is how strongly their culture was connected to the sky. The Egyptians watched the stars constantly. Their temples were often aligned with specific constellations. Their calendar was based on the movement of the sun and the rising of certain stars, especially Sirius, which was extremely important to them. When Sirius appeared in the sky just before sunrise, it marked the flooding of the Nile, an event that made farming possible and allowed the civilization to survive. But the connection seems deeper than just agriculture. Some temples are aligned so precisely that sunlight enters certain chambers only on specific days of the year. In a few places, the light travels down long corridors and illuminates statues hidden deep inside the structure, almost as if the building itself was designed to interact with the sky. This has led some people to believe that Egyptian priests may have seen the heavens as more than just lights in the night. They may have believed the stars were connected to the origin of life, or even to the origin of their own civilization. Ancient texts speak about gods who came from the sky, beings who brought knowledge, beings who taught humans how to build, how to write, and how to understand the world. Of course, these stories are usually explained as mythology. Every culture has stories about gods. Every civilization has legends about powerful beings who existed long ago. But in Egypt, the stories are unusually detailed. The gods are described as rulers who lived on earth before the pharaohs. They are said to have passed knowledge directly to humans. Some texts even list long periods of time where these beings ruled before the first human kings appeared. To modern historians, these accounts are symbolic or religious. To others, they sound like memories of something that might have been real. And this is where the mystery of Egypt becomes so fascinating and so difficult to fully understand. Because the more you study it, the less it feels like a simple ancient civilization, and the more it feels like the remains of something much older, something that survived a disaster, something that left pieces of knowledge behind, and something the Egyptians themselves may have been trying to preserve. There is also the strange fact that Egyptian history seems to begin suddenly, with very little evidence of how such a complex society formed so quickly. Writing, religion, government, architecture, and mathematics all appear in a relatively short span of time. Some researchers think this could mean Egypt inherited knowledge from an earlier culture that has been lost, a civilization that may have existed before the last ice age, before rising sea levels covered large parts of the world, before history as we know it began. This idea is often considered controversial, but it continues to appear in research, books, and theories because certain details do not fit perfectly into the standard timeline. For example, some of the oldest structures in Egypt show signs of erosion that look like they were caused by heavy rain, even though Egypt has been mostly dry for thousands of years. This has led to the suggestion that parts of these monuments could be older than we think, possibly built during a time when the climate was very different. If that were true, it would mean Egyptian civilization did not start where we think it did. It would mean the pyramids, the temples, the knowledge might be echoes of a world that existed long before recorded history. And that possibility is one of the reasons Egypt continues to capture the imagination like no other place on Earth. Because when you stand in front of those stones, when you see the size, the precision, the silence, it feels less like looking at ruins and more like looking at a message from the past, a message we are still trying to read, a message that may not be fully understood yet. And as we go deeper into these stories tonight, we are going to take our time, slowly, calmly, following the clues one by one and seeing where they lead. When you spend enough time looking at the remains of ancient Egypt, one feeling keeps returning again and again. The feeling that the people who built these structures were not thinking in the same way we do today. Their world was not only physical, it was symbolic, astronomical, mathematical, and spiritual all at the same time. Every temple, every statue, Every carving seems to carry more than one meaning, as if the builders wanted their knowledge to survive, even if the original explanation was forgotten. One of the strongest examples of this is the way Egyptian architecture seems to follow patterns that appear again and again across different sites, different dynasties, and even different time periods. The same proportions, the same angles, the same alignments toward the stars. It is almost as if there was a set of rules that the builders were following, rules that were never fully written down, but carefully passed from generation to generation. Some researchers believe these rules may have come from what the Egyptians called sacred geometry. Certain shapes and ratios were believed to reflect the structure of the universe itself. The idea was that if you built something using the same proportions found in nature, the structure would be in harmony with the world, and possibly even with the cosmos. This idea sounds philosophical, but when people started measuring the pyramids more carefully, they noticed something unusual. The proportions of the Great Pyramid appear to match mathematical relationships that we usually associate with much later discoveries. The ratio between the height and the base is very close to a value connected to the number pi. Other measurements seem to relate to the golden ratio, a proportion that appears in plants, shells, and even the human body. It is possible that this is coincidence. It is also possible that the Egyptians understood these relationships long before we thought anyone did. What makes the mystery deeper is that these proportions are not only found in one pyramid. Similar patterns appear in temples, in statues, and even in the layout of entire cities. It gives the impression that Egyptian builders were not just stacking stones. They were designing structures according to a system that connected mathematics, astronomy, and belief. And when we start looking at the stars, the mystery becomes even stronger. Many Egyptian temples are aligned in ways that only make sense if the builders were carefully watching the sky. Some face the exact point where the sun rises on the solstice. Others line up with the setting of specific stars that were important in Egyptian religion. In a few cases, entire complexes appear to mirror patterns seen in the constellations. The most famous example of this idea is the suggestion that the pyramids at Giza match the 3 stars of Orion's belt. When seen from above, the layout of the pyramid seems to resemble the pattern of those stars in the night sky. The match is not perfect, but it is close enough that many people believe it was intentional. In Egyptian mythology, Orion was connected to Osiris, the god of the afterlife and rebirth. Osiris was one of the most important figures in their belief system, a ruler who died and then returned, becoming a symbol of eternal life. If the pyramids were aligned with Orion, it could mean the builders were trying to connect the pharaoh with the stars, as if the pyramid was not only a monument, but a doorway. Some ancient texts describe the pharaoh traveling to the sky after death, joining the gods among the stars. These writings appear in what we now call the pyramid texts, carved inside certain pyramids thousands of years ago. They speak about the soul rising, about gates in the heavens, about the king becoming one with the eternal sky. To modern readers, these words sound poetic. To the Egyptians, they may have been instructions. Another strange detail about Egypt is how often knowledge seems to appear fully formed, without a clear beginning. Writing, for example, appears suddenly in a very complete form. Hieroglyphs are already complex when they first show up in the historical record. They include symbols for sounds, symbols for ideas, and symbols for entire words. There is very little evidence showing how this system developed step by step. The same thing happens with their understanding of the human body. The Egyptians practiced mummification with incredible precision. They knew how to remove organs without damaging the body, how to preserve tissue, and how to use natural chemicals to slow decay. Some of their techniques were so effective that mummies have survived for thousands of years. This level of knowledge suggests long experience, yet the historical timeline sometimes makes it look as if these skills appeared very quickly. Because of this, Some researchers have wondered if Egyptian civilization inherited knowledge from an earlier culture that disappeared. A culture that may have existed before the Great Floods at the end of the last ice age, when sea levels rose and many coastal regions were lost. If such a civilization existed, its remains would be difficult to find today, because most ancient settlements were built near water. Over thousands of years, those places would have been covered by the ocean. What survived would be only the structures built farther inland, or the knowledge carried by the people who escaped. In Egyptian mythology, there are stories about a time before the pharaohs, when divine rulers governed the land. These beings are sometimes called the followers of Horus. They are described as living long before recorded history, bringing order and knowledge to the world. Historians usually interpret these stories as symbolic, but the fact that the Egyptians themselves believed their civilization came from an earlier age is interesting. They did not see themselves as the beginning. They saw themselves as inheriting something ancient. There is also the strange way Egyptian culture seemed obsessed with preservation. They built monuments meant to last forever. They carved writing into stone instead of using materials that would decay. They preserved bodies so carefully that the faces of people from thousands of years ago can still be seen today. It is almost as if they expected the future to forget them, and they were trying to make sure that at least part of their knowledge would survive. Even their temples feel like they were designed to endure time itself. The walls are covered in carvings that tell stories, show rituals, and record events, but the meaning is not always obvious. Some images look symbolic, some look literal, and some look like something in between. There are carvings that show strange objects, shapes that resemble machines, figures holding tools that do not look like ordinary tools. Most historians explain these as artistic symbols, but when you see them in person, it is hard not to wonder if there is more to the story. And this is what makes ancient Egypt so different from many other civilizations. With most ancient cultures, the mystery fades as we learn more. With Egypt, the mystery often grows. The more measurements are taken, the more texts are translated, the more ruins are uncovered, the more it feels like we are only seeing the surface. It is like standing in front of a locked door that has been closed for thousands of years. We can see the carvings on the outside. We can study the shape of the handle. We can guess what might be inside. But the door itself is still closed. And as we continue tonight, we are going to keep walking slowly through these ancient places, looking at the clues the Egyptians left behind, and trying to understand why this civilization still feels so different, so precise, so advanced, and so mysterious, even after all this time. The more you look at the monuments of ancient Egypt, the more you start to notice something that feels almost impossible to ignore. Many of the largest structures were built at the very beginning of Egyptian history, not at the end. In most civilizations, technology improves over time. Early buildings are simple, later ones become more complex, and the greatest achievements usually appear after centuries of development. But in Egypt, the pattern sometimes looks reversed. The Great Pyramid, the largest and most precise pyramid ever built, appears very early in the timeline. Later pyramids, built by later dynasties, are often smaller and less accurate. Some are even poorly constructed compared to the older ones, as if the builders had lost part of the knowledge that was once available to them. This is one of the details that makes researchers pause. If the Egyptians were slowly learning how to build better structures, we would expect the earliest pyramids to be rough experiments, and the later ones to be perfect. But instead, the oldest examples often show the highest level of precision, while the later ones show signs of decline. Some historians explain this by saying that the earliest pyramids had the most resources, the most workers, and the strongest rulers, so they were able to build on a larger scale. That explanation makes sense, but it does not fully explain the technical differences that appear when the stones are measured closely. In the Great Pyramid, Many of the blocks are cut so precisely that the gaps between them are almost invisible. Some of the internal passages follow angles that are extremely exact, not just approximately correct, but accurate to a degree that would require careful instruments. The base of the pyramid is level within a very small margin, even though it covers a huge area. Later pyramids often do not match that level of precision. This has led to the idea that the builders of the earliest pyramids may have been working with knowledge that was later lost, or at least not fully understood by the generations that followed. Another detail that adds to the mystery is the way the stones themselves were shaped. Some blocks used in Egyptian temples and pyramids weigh many tons, and in certain places, they were fitted together with such accuracy that modern engineers still debate how it was done. In some temples, especially at places like Karnak and Luxor, enormous stone columns rise high into the air, each one carved from a single piece of rock. The size alone is impressive, but the placement is just as surprising. Moving stones that large without modern machinery would have required careful planning, coordination, and tools strong enough to cut through extremely hard material. The Egyptians are believed to have used copper tools, stone hammers, and simple saws. Yet the marks left on some of the stones suggest cutting methods that seem unusually smooth and controlled. Some surfaces look almost polished, even on granite, which is a very hard stone. Because of this, some people have suggested that the Egyptians may have had techniques that we do not fully understand today. Not necessarily advanced machines in the modern sense, but methods of working stone that were lost over time, passed down for generations, and then forgotten when the tradition ended. There is also the strange fact that Egyptian temples often appear to have been built in layers, with newer structures placed on top of older ones. In some places, when archaeologists dig beneath the visible ruins, they find signs of earlier construction buried underneath. Sometimes the lower layers look older and more weathered, even when the official timeline says the structure should be newer. This has led to the idea that some sites may have been rebuilt many times over thousands of years, each generation adding something on top of what came before. If that is true, then some of the oldest parts of Egypt might still be hidden below the ground, covered by sand, stone, and later buildings. The desert itself makes this possible. Sand can bury entire structures over time, preserving them in silence until they are uncovered again. There are places in Egypt where only the tops of temples were visible for centuries, while the rest remained buried beneath the surface. This raises a strange thought. How much of ancient Egypt have we actually seen, and how much is still hidden? There are also questions about how the Egyptians seem to understand the land itself in a very precise way. Many of their major monuments are located along the Nile, in positions that appear carefully chosen. The river was the center of their world, but the placement of temples and pyramids sometimes suggests more than just convenience. Some researchers believe the Egyptians may have been mapping the land using knowledge of geometry and astronomy, placing structures in locations that had symbolic meaning as well as practical value. For example, the pyramids at Giza are not only aligned with the stars, but also positioned near the center of the landmass of Earth, if the planet is measured in a certain way. This could be coincidence, but the accuracy has made some people wonder if the builders understood the shape and size of the Earth far earlier than we usually think. There are also stories about hidden chambers beneath the pyramids, tunnels beneath the sand, and sealed rooms that have never been opened. Some of these stories come from old writings, others from modern scans and surveys that suggest there may be empty spaces inside the structures that have not yet been explored. In recent years, scientists have used special scanning techniques to look inside the pyramids without opening them. In some cases, they found unexpected voids, spaces that were not part of the original known design. No one knows exactly why these spaces were made or what they were used for. It adds another layer to the feeling that these monuments still hold secrets. Ancient Egyptian texts also speak about knowledge being kept hidden inside temples, protected by priests, and only revealed to those who were ready to understand it. The priests were not only religious leaders, they were also astronomers, mathematicians, and keepers of records. They studied the sky, tracked the seasons, and performed rituals that were believed to keep balance in the world. To them, science and religion were not separate things. Understanding the universe meant understanding the divine order behind it. Some writings describe special rooms inside temples where sacred objects were kept, where only certain people were allowed to enter. These places were meant to preserve knowledge, not just for the present, but for the future. This idea appears again and again in Egyptian culture. The idea that knowledge must be protected so it will not be lost. It makes you wonder if the Egyptians themselves believed that civilizations could disappear, that history could be forgotten, and that the only way to survive time was to carve your understanding into stone. Even their stories about the afterlife seem connected to this idea of preservation. They believed the soul could live forever, but only if certain rules were followed, only if the body was protected, only if the proper words were spoken. Nothing was left to chance. Everything was recorded. Everything was measured. Everything was built to last. And yet, even with all of that care, so much of their knowledge is still unclear to us. We can read their carvings, but we do not always know what they meant. We can see their temples, but we do not always know why they were built that way. We can measure their pyramids, but we do not fully know how they were made. It is like looking at the remains of a message written in a language that we only partly understand. And the deeper we go into the secrets of Egypt, the more it feels like those messages were meant to survive for a very long time, waiting for a future that might finally be ready to read them. One of the most fascinating things about ancient Egypt is the way their entire civilization seemed to revolve around the idea that time moves in cycles, not in a straight line. To us, history usually feels like a long path that goes forward, one event after another, always moving ahead. But the Egyptians often describe time as something that repeats, something that rises and falls like the sun, something that can begin again after it ends. This belief appears in their myths, in their rituals, and even in the way they built their monuments. The daily journey of the sun across the sky was one of the most important symbols in Egyptian life. Every morning, the sun god Ra was believed to rise again after traveling through the darkness of the night. This was not just a story about the sky. It was a symbol of renewal, of rebirth, of the idea that what disappears is not always gone forever. Because of this, many Egyptian temples were designed to follow the movement of the sun. Long corridors, narrow doorways, and carefully placed chambers allowed sunlight to enter only at certain moments. On specific days of the year, the light would travel deep into the temple and illuminate statues or sacred spaces that normally remained in darkness. These moments were not accidents. They required careful observation of the sky and precise construction. The builders needed to know exactly where the sun would rise and set on different days, and they needed to design the structure so that the light would fall in the right place at the right time. This tells us something important. The Egyptians were not only building for the present, they were building for events that would happen long after the builders themselves were gone. This idea of building for the future appears again and again in Egypt. The pyramids, for example, were not meant to last for a generation or even for a few centuries. They were meant to stand forever. The stones were chosen for durability, the shapes were made stable, and the design was simple enough that it would not collapse easily, even after thousands of years. It almost feels as if the builders expected their world to change, but they wanted their knowledge to remain. There is another strange detail about Egyptian monuments that many people do not notice at first. Some of the largest temples show signs of being repaired, rebuilt, or added onto many times. Later rulers often carved their own names over older carvings, sometimes erasing what was there before. This was not always done to destroy the past. Sometimes it seems to have been done to keep the structure alive, as if each generation was responsible for maintaining something that was older than all of them. In certain places, the deeper parts of temples look older and more weathered than the parts built later. The lower stones sometimes show different styles of cutting, different sizes, even different types of material. This has led to the idea that some Egyptian sites may have been sacred long before the pharaohs we know about. The rulers whose names appear in history might have inherited places that were already ancient when they arrived. There are also stories in Egyptian texts that speak about a time before the known kings, when the land was ruled by beings described as gods or semi-divine rulers. These figures were said to have lived for very long periods, far longer than normal human lifetimes, and they were credited with creating the first temples and bringing order to the world. Modern historians usually see these stories as mythology, but it is interesting that the Egyptians themselves believed their civilization did not begin with them. They believed something came before. Another mystery appears when we look at the way the Egyptians understood the earth itself. Some of their measurements seem surprisingly accurate. They knew the length of the year with very small error. They understood the importance of the cardinal directions. They were able to align structures north, south, east, and west with incredible precision, even without modern instruments. The Great Pyramid, for example, is aligned almost perfectly to true north. The difference is so small that it would be difficult to achieve even today without careful tools. How did they do this? One explanation is that they used the stars. By watching the movement of certain stars in the night sky, it is possible to find the true north direction. But doing this with the level of accuracy seen at Giza would require patience, skill, and a deep understanding of the sky. And that brings us back to something that appears again and again in Egypt. They were watching the stars constantly, not just for navigation, not just for farming, but as if the sky itself was part of their belief system, part of their science, part of their understanding of life and death. Some temples are aligned with stars that were important thousands of years ago, but are not in the same position today, because the Earth slowly changes its orientation over time. This movement, called precession, takes about 26,000 years to complete. What makes this interesting is that some Egyptian alignments seem to match positions of stars from very ancient times, older than the dates usually given for the buildings themselves. This does not prove anything by itself, but it has led some researchers to wonder if parts of Egyptian knowledge could have been much older than the monuments we see now. If knowledge was passed down from an earlier civilization, the buildings we see might not be the beginning, they might be the continuation. Another detail that adds to this feeling is the way Egyptian writing sometimes describes knowledge as something that was remembered, not invented. Certain texts speak about teachings from earlier times, about wisdom that came from the gods, about secrets that had to be protected so they would not be lost. The priests were responsible for keeping these teachings alive, copying them, repeating them, and passing them on. It was not just religion, it was memory. And when you think about how long Egypt lasted as a civilization, this idea becomes even more interesting. For thousands of years, the same symbols were used, the same gods were worshipped, the same styles of building continued, even as rulers changed and dynasties rose and fell. Most civilizations change quickly. Egypt changed slowly. It is almost as if they were trying to hold on to something, trying to keep a connection to the past, trying to preserve knowledge that they believed was important, not just for their time, but for any time that might come later. Even the way they wrote on stone instead of paper or wood suggests this. Stone lasts. Sand can cover it, but it does not destroy it easily. A carving can survive storms, floods, and thousands of years of heat. And when we find those carvings today, we are looking at messages that were meant to outlive the people who made them. Messages that were meant to survive the fall of kingdoms, the loss of language, the passing of entire ages. As we continue exploring these secrets, it becomes harder to see ancient Egypt as just another civilization from the past. It starts to feel more like a bridge, a connection between something older and something that came later. And the question that keeps coming back is the same one people have asked for centuries. Were the Egyptians the first to discover this knowledge, or were they the last to remember it? There is a moment many people experience when they first see the pyramids in person. From far away, they look almost simple, just large shapes rising out of the desert. But the closer you get, the stranger they begin to feel. The size becomes difficult to understand, the angles look too perfect, and the stones seem too precise for something built thousands of years ago. It creates a quiet kind of confusion, the feeling that what you are looking at should not exist in the time it came from. The Great Pyramid especially has this effect. It is not only the largest pyramid in Egypt, it is also the most accurate in its construction, the most carefully aligned, and the one that raises the most questions. For a long time, historians believed it was built as a tomb for the pharaoh Khufu, and that explanation is still the official one today. But even within that explanation, there are details that do not fully fit. Inside the pyramid, there are chambers and passages arranged in a very unusual way. The main chamber, often called the King's Chamber, is built from massive blocks of granite that were brought from far away, even though limestone was available much closer. Above that chamber, there are several layers of heavy stones placed in a way that seems designed to reduce pressure from the weight above. The design is extremely careful, almost as if the builders understood exactly how the structure would behave long after it was finished. There is also the fact that the pyramid does not contain the kind of decorations usually found in Egyptian tombs. Later pyramids and burial sites are filled with carvings, paintings, and writing that describe the journey to the afterlife. The Great Pyramid is mostly empty, plain stone, silent walls, and narrow passages. Some researchers believe this suggests the pyramid may have had another purpose, something more than a burial place. Over the years, people have suggested many possibilities. Some think it could have been a temple, others think it may have been a kind of monument to knowledge, and some even believe it may have been designed to work with natural forces like sound, vibration, or energy. These ideas are difficult to prove, but they continue to appear because the structure itself is so unusual. Another mystery is the way the pyramid seems connected to the Earth in ways that feel almost intentional. Its position on the planet is very close to the center of the landmass, if the continents are measured in a certain way. The pyramid also sits almost exactly on the 30th parallel north, a line that passes through several ancient sites around the world. This could be coincidence, but when combined with the precise alignment of the pyramid to the cardinal directions, it makes some people wonder if the builders understood the shape and size of the Earth much earlier than we usually believe. There are also strange details about the internal passages that point towards certain stars. Small shafts inside the pyramid are angled in ways that seem to line up with constellations that were important in Egyptian mythology. Some of these shafts point toward the region of the sky associated with Orion, while others point towards stars connected to the idea of eternity. To the Egyptians, the stars were not just lights in the sky. They were part of the afterlife, part of the journey the soul would take after death. The idea that the pyramid could be aligned with the stars suggests that it may have been built as a connection between the earth and the sky, a place where the physical world and the cosmic world were meant to meet. Another detail that makes the pyramid difficult to understand is the level of organization that would have been required to build it. Moving millions of stones, shaping them, transporting them, and placing them with such accuracy would require careful planning, skilled workers, and a system capable of controlling huge projects over many years. This means the society that built the pyramid was not only advanced in construction, but also in mathematics, management, and communication. It was a civilization that could coordinate thousands of people toward a single goal and keep that goal consistent over a long period of time. That alone is impressive, but what makes it more mysterious is how early this happened. The Great Pyramid was built more than 4,000 years ago, yet even today, it remains one of the most precise structures ever made. Later civilizations, with more advanced tools, often did not build with the same level of accuracy. This has led some people to wonder if the pyramid was the result of knowledge that came from an earlier time, knowledge that may have been preserved rather than invented. There are also stories about hidden chambers inside the pyramid that have never been fully explored. Modern scanning techniques have found empty spaces that do not appear on the original plans. These spaces could be structural, meant to reduce weight, or they could have had some other purpose that we do not yet understand. The idea that there may still be hidden rooms inside the pyramid keeps the mystery alive. It suggests that even after centuries of study, the structure may still have secrets waiting to be discovered. The same feeling appears in other parts of Egypt as well. In the temples at Abydos, there are carvings that some people believe look like modern machines. In the Temple of Dendera, there are images that have been interpreted as strange devices, though historians explain them as symbolic representations. Whether these interpretations are correct or not, they show how unusual Egyptian art can feel. The symbols are complex, layered, and often difficult to understand without knowing the beliefs behind them. The Egyptians did not separate science, religion, and symbolism the way we do today. For them, understanding the world meant understanding the hidden order behind it. Geometry, astronomy, architecture, and ritual were all connected. Because of this, their monuments sometimes feel like they were designed with more than one purpose. A temple could be a place of worship, a calendar, a record of history, and a symbol of cosmic balance all at the same time. And this is one of the reasons Egypt continues to feel mysterious, even after so much research. The structures are still there. The carvings are still there. The measurements can still be taken. But the meaning behind them is not always clear. It is like finding a book written in a language you can read, but not fully understand. You recognize the words. You see the patterns. You know there is a message. But part of that message is still hidden. And as we keep moving deeper into the secrets of ancient Egypt tonight, we begin to see that the pyramids may not be the only place where that hidden knowledge was preserved. Because there are temples, carvings, and stories that suggest the Egyptians believed their world was connected to something much older, something that existed before the pharaohs, before the pyramids, and maybe even before history itself. If there is one place in Egypt that makes people feel like they are standing in front of something far older than recorded history, it is the Sphinx. Unlike the pyramids, which at least appear in written records connected to known pharaohs, the Sphinx feels different. It sits in silence, carved from a single mass of stone, staring toward the horizon as if it has been watching the world change for longer than anyone remembers. The official explanation says the Sphinx was built during the reign of the pharaoh Khafra, around the same time the pyramids at Giza were constructed. According to this idea, the face represents the pharaoh, and the statue was part of the same complex as his pyramid and temple. But there are details about the Sphinx that have made some researchers question whether it might be older than the pyramids themselves. One of the most talked about mysteries is the weathering on the body of the Sphinx. The surface of the stone shows deep erosion in patterns that some geologists say look like they were caused by heavy rainfall, not just wind and sand. Today, the area around Giza is extremely dry, and it has been dry for thousands of years. Rain strong enough to carve those kinds of marks would have happened in a much earlier time, when the climate of Egypt was very different. If the erosion really was caused by rain, that could mean the Sphinx was carved long before the official date, possibly thousands of years earlier, during a period when the region was wetter and greener. This idea is controversial, and not all experts agree with it. Some say the erosion could have been caused by other natural processes, or by the stone breaking down in uneven ways. But the fact that the question exists at all is part of what keeps the mystery alive. Because if the Sphinx is older than the pyramids, then the timeline of Egyptian history would not be as simple as we think. Another strange detail is the size and shape of the statue itself. The body of the Sphinx is enormous, but the head is smaller than it would normally be for a statue of that size. Some researchers have suggested that the head may have been carved again at a later time, possibly changing the original face into the one we see now. If that were true, it would mean the statue might have existed before the pharaoh whose face it is believed to show. It would mean the builders of the pyramids could have found the Sphinx already there and decided to reshape it instead of creating it from the beginning. There are also ancient stories that speak about hidden chambers beneath the Sphinx. Legends describe tunnels, rooms, and even a hall of records where knowledge from a lost age was said to be stored. These stories appear in different forms, sometimes in Egyptian traditions, sometimes in later writings, and sometimes in modern theories. Over the years, there have been attempts to scan the ground around the Sphinx using different kinds of equipment. In some cases, researchers found signs of empty spaces beneath the surface, but digging in that area has always been limited. Because the site is so important, any excavation has to be done very carefully, and many places remain unexplored. This means that even today, it is possible there are parts of the Giza Plateau that no one has ever seen. And that idea alone is enough to make the Sphinx feel like more than just a statue. It feels like a guardian, a silent figure watching over something buried, something that might still be waiting to be uncovered. The Egyptians themselves treated the Sphinx as a sacred object. Later pharaohs repaired it, restored parts of it, and built temples near it, even though it was already ancient in their time. Some inscriptions suggest that the statue was already covered in sand when those rulers found it, and they had to dig it out to see it again. That means the Sphinx may have been buried and uncovered many times throughout history, disappearing and reappearing as the desert moved. Imagine how strange that must have felt to the people who lived there. To find a giant stone figure emerging from the sand, older than anyone could remember, with no clear story of who built it. It would feel less like a monument, and more like a mystery left behind by another age. This idea connects to something that appears again and again in Egyptian beliefs: the idea that knowledge comes from the past, not just from the present. Many of their stories describe a time when the world was closer to the gods, when beings with great wisdom taught humans how to live, how to build, and how to keep balance in the world. One of the most important figures in these stories is Thoth, the god of writing, mathematics, and knowledge. Thoth was believed to have given humans the ability to record information, to measure the land, and to understand the movements of the sky. In some traditions, Thoth is described not just as a god, but as a teacher, a figure who brought knowledge from a time before the known kings of Egypt. Some ancient texts even speak about books of Thoth, writings that contained powerful knowledge and were kept hidden in temples, protected so they would not fall into the wrong hands. Whether these stories are symbolic or based on real events, they show that the Egyptians believed wisdom could be lost, and that it had to be protected. That belief makes their monuments feel different. They were not only building for themselves, they were building for the future. They carved their knowledge into stone, placed their temples in the desert, and aligned their structures with the stars, as if they expected the world to change, but wanted their message to survive. And when we look at the Sphinx, sitting there in silence after thousands of years, it is easy to understand why so many people feel that there is still something we have not fully discovered. Something hidden beneath the sand, something hidden in the carvings, something hidden in the stories. Because the deeper we go into ancient Egypt, the more it feels like the civilization itself was trying to tell us something, but only in pieces, only in symbols, only in clues that would last longer than words. And as we continue tonight, we are going to follow those clues even further into the temples, the texts, and the strange ideas the Egyptians had about life, death, and the possibility that history may be much older than we think. When we move away from the pyramids and the Sphinx and begin looking deeper into the temples of ancient Egypt, the feeling of mystery does not disappear. In many ways, it becomes even stronger. The temples were not only places for prayer or ceremony. They were carefully designed spaces where architecture, astronomy, mathematics, and belief were all connected together, almost as if the builders were trying to recreate a model of the universe in stone. One of the most unusual things about Egyptian temples is how they were built in stages, often over hundreds or even thousands of years. A single temple complex might contain parts built by many different rulers, yet the overall layout still follows the same basic pattern. There is usually a long entrance, leading into open courtyards, then into darker halls, and finally into a small inner chamber where only priests were allowed to go. This movement from light into darkness does not seem accidental. Some researchers believe the temples were designed to represent a journey, a path from the ordinary world into a more sacred one. As you moved deeper inside, the ceilings became lower, the rooms became darker, and the space felt more enclosed, as if the outside world was slowly being left behind. In certain temples, the inner chambers are so carefully aligned that sunlight only reaches them on specific days of the year. When that happens, the light travels through the entire structure and touches statues or carvings hidden deep inside. These moments required precise knowledge of the sun's path across the sky, and the builders would have needed to understand how the earth moves through the seasons. This level of accuracy shows that the priests and architects were watching the sky very closely. The Egyptians believed the heavens were not separate from the earth. The stars, the sun, and the movements of the sky were part of the same order that governed life on the ground. If the sky moved in a certain way, the world below had to remain in balance with it. Because of this, temples were not only places of worship, they were also places where the order of the universe was studied, recorded, and protected. In the temple at Karnak, one of the largest temple complexes ever built, the scale alone makes it hard to imagine how ancient people could have constructed it. Massive columns rise high above the ground, each one carved with symbols, each one placed in perfect lines that stretch across the courtyard. When you stand among those columns, it feels less like a building and more like a forest made of stone. What makes Karnak even more interesting is that it was expanded again and again over many centuries. Each ruler added new sections, new walls, new statues, but instead of replacing the old structures, they built around them. This created layers of construction, almost like the temple was growing slowly over time, always keeping the older parts inside. Some people believe this shows that the Egyptians did not want to erase the past. They wanted to preserve it, even when they added something new. The older structures remained sacred, and the newer ones were placed carefully, so the original layout would not be lost. There is also the strange fact that some temples contain carvings that look almost out of place, shapes and figures that seem difficult to explain. In the temple at Abydos, there is a famous set of carvings that some people believe resemble modern machines, shapes that look like helicopters, airplanes, or other objects that should not appear in ancient art. Most historians explain these carvings as the result of overlapping symbols, where older carvings were covered by newer ones, creating shapes that only look unusual when seen today. This explanation makes sense, but the fact that the images seem so strange is part of why the mystery continues to attract attention. It reminds us that we are looking at a culture very different from our own, one that used symbols in ways we may not fully understand anymore. Another temple that often appears in discussions about Egyptian secrets is the temple at Dendera. Inside, there are carvings showing objects that some people believe look like strange devices, long shapes connected to what appear to be cords or tubes, held by figures in ceremonial poses. Again, historians explain these images as symbolic representations of creation, light, and divine power. But the designs are unusual enough that they continue to make people wonder if the Egyptians were describing something in a way that no longer makes sense to us. The deeper you go into Egyptian art, the more you notice that it does not always show the world in a simple way. Figures are drawn in positions that seem unnatural, with heads turned sideways, bodies facing forward, and eyes looking straight out. This was not because the artists could not draw realistically. It was because they were following rules meant to show the most important parts of a person at the same time. Everything had meaning. The size of a figure showed importance. The position of a hand showed power. The direction someone faced could show life, death, or the afterlife. Because of this, Egyptian carvings sometimes look more like codes than pictures, messages that were meant to be understood by people who knew the symbols. The priests who worked in the temples were trained for years to understand these meanings. They were not only religious leaders, but also scholars, astronomers, and keepers of records. They knew how to read the sky, how to measure the land, how to perform rituals, and how to keep the traditions exactly the same as they had been before. This careful repetition may be one of the reasons Egyptian culture lasted so long without changing very much. They believed the world stayed in balance only if the old ways were followed. If the rituals stopped, the order of the universe could break. If the knowledge was lost, chaos could return. And this idea appears again and again in their writings. The idea that the past must be remembered, that the original teachings must not be forgotten, that the first knowledge was the most important. It makes you wonder if the Egyptians believed their civilization was not the first, but the one responsible for keeping something alive. Something older than the pyramids, older than the temples, maybe older than history itself. As we keep moving deeper into these stories tonight, the picture becomes less clear, but also more interesting. The monuments are real, the carvings are real, the measurements are real, but the meaning behind them feels like it is only partly visible. It is like looking at a reflection in water. You can see the shape, you can see the movement, but the full image is never completely still. And the more we look at the secrets of ancient Egypt, the more it feels like the civilization itself was built to leave behind questions. Questions that would last as long as the stones themselves. One of the reasons ancient Egypt continues to feel so mysterious is the way their beliefs about life and death were so detailed, so carefully planned, and so different from the way most modern cultures think. To the Egyptians, death was not the end of existence. It was a transition, a movement from one state of being into another. But that transition was not automatic. It required preparation, knowledge, and the correct rituals, almost as if the afterlife followed rules that had to be understood. This belief shaped nearly everything they built. The pyramids, the tombs, the temples, and even the carvings on the walls were connected to the idea that the soul would continue after the body stopped living. The Egyptians believed that a person was made of several parts, not just the physical body, but also the spirit, the life force, and something they called the Ka and the Ba, aspects of the self that needed to remain in balance for the person to exist in the afterlife. Because of this, preserving the body, became extremely important. Mummification was not only about keeping the body from decaying, it was about making sure the soul would have a place to return to. The process was very precise. The organs were removed carefully. The body was treated with natural salts, wrapped in layers of cloth, and placed in a tomb filled with objects that the person might need in the next world. What makes this interesting is how much knowledge this process required. The priests who performed mummification understood the human body well enough to remove organs without destroying the shape of the person. They knew how to prevent decay using natural materials. They knew how to seal the body so it could last for thousands of years. This was not simple work. It required experience. It required training. And it suggests that the practice developed over a very long time. Another strange detail is how much effort the Egyptians put into writing instructions for the afterlife. Texts were placed inside tombs, written on walls, painted on coffins, and even wrapped with the mummy itself. These writings describe the journey the soul would take, the challenges it might face, and the words that had to be spoken to pass safely into the next world. One of the most famous collections of these writings is what we now call the Book of the Dead, but the Egyptians did not see it as a single book. It was a group of spells, prayers, and instructions that changed over time, added to by different priests and different generations. Some of the passages describe the soul traveling through a strange landscape, passing through gates, answering questions, and being judged by divine beings. The heart of the person was weighed against a feather, symbolizing truth and balance. If the heart was heavy with wrongdoing, the soul could be lost. These stories sound symbolic, but the Egyptians treated them very seriously. The words had to be written correctly. The rituals had to be performed exactly. Even small mistakes were believed to have consequences. It feels almost like they believed the afterlife was a place with rules that had to be followed precisely, as if it were part of the same ordered universe they saw in the stars and the movements of the sun. This idea of order appears everywhere in Egyptian culture. They called it ma'at, the principle of balance, truth, and harmony. The world stayed stable only if ma'at was preserved. The pharaoh was responsible for maintaining it, the priests were responsible for understanding it, and the people were expected to live according to it. If balance was broken, chaos could return. This belief may help explain why the Egyptians built everything so carefully. The precise alignments, the exact measurements, the repeated symbols, all of it may have been part of keeping the world in the correct state. Another mystery appears when we look at the tombs themselves. Some of the tombs in Egypt, especially those in the Valley of the Kings, were hidden deep inside the rock, far away from the pyramids. These tombs were carved into the cliffs, with long corridors leading down into chambers filled with paintings and carvings. The walls show detailed scenes of the afterlife, but they also show strange objects, unusual creatures, and symbols that seem difficult to understand. Some figures look human, some look like animals, and some look like combinations of both. To the Egyptians, these were not imaginary monsters. They were part of the spiritual world, part of the journey the soul had to travel. Each figure had a role, each symbol had a meaning, and each image was meant to guide the person through the next life. But the complexity of these drawings makes some researchers wonder if the Egyptians were describing experiences in a symbolic way, using images to represent ideas that could not easily be explained in words. There are also strange objects placed in tombs that seem to have no clear purpose. Small statues, carved tools, boxes filled with unknown items, and objects made from materials that had to be brought from far away. Some of these may have been offerings, some may have been symbolic, and some may have been meant for rituals we no longer understand. The deeper archaeologists dig, the more they find that Egyptian tombs were not only burial places, they were carefully designed spaces, almost like small worlds built underground, meant to hold everything a person might need for eternity. And yet, even with all this preparation, the Egyptians also believed knowledge itself had to survive. Many temples contain rooms that seem to have been used for storing scrolls, records, and sacred objects. Ancient writers spoke about libraries, collections of texts, and teachings that were kept hidden from the public. Only certain priests were allowed to see them, and the knowledge was passed down carefully. Some legends speak about a hidden archive, sometimes called the Hall of Records, where the wisdom of an earlier age was stored. There is no clear proof that such a place exists, but the idea appears again and again in stories connected to Egypt. It fits with the feeling that the Egyptians believed civilization could be lost, that disasters could happen, and that knowledge had to be protected so it could survive into the future. When you look at their monuments with that idea in mind, they feel less like decorations and more like messages. Messages carved in stone so they would not disappear. Messages aligned with the stars so they could not be forgotten. Messages buried in the desert where time moves slowly. And as we keep moving deeper into these secrets tonight, the picture becomes even stranger, because some of the ideas the Egyptians had about the universe sound surprisingly similar to ideas that only became common in modern science. Ideas about cycles, ideas about hidden forces, ideas about the world being part of something much larger than what we see. And the more we look at those ideas, the more it begins to feel like the Egyptians were not only looking at the past, they were also trying to understand the nature of reality itself. As we continue moving deeper into the strange and quiet world of ancient Egypt, one thing begins to stand out more than anything else. The Egyptians did not see the universe as random. They believed everything followed patterns, and those patterns could be discovered if you watched carefully enough. The movement of the stars, the flooding of the Nile, the cycle of life and death, all of it was part of a system that repeated over and over again. To them, understanding these patterns was not only science, it was sacred knowledge. This is why astronomy played such an important role in Egyptian life. The priests spent long nights watching the sky, tracking the position of stars, recording the rising and setting of constellations, and marking the exact moment when certain stars appeared on the horizon. These observations were used to create calendars, to predict the seasons, and to decide when rituals should be performed. One star in particular was extremely important to the Egyptians, the star we call Sirius. Every year, just before sunrise, Sirius would appear in the sky after being hidden for a period of time. This moment happened almost exactly when the Nile began to flood, bringing water and fertile soil to the land. Because of this, the rising of Sirius became a symbol of renewal and life. It marked the beginning of the new year, the return of growth, and the continuation of the cycle that allowed Egypt to survive. The priests watched for this event very carefully, and their calendar was based on its appearance. But the connection between the Egyptians and the sky seems to go beyond simple farming. Many of their temples are aligned not only with the sun, but also with specific stars that had meaning in their mythology. Some structures appear to point toward the constellation we call Orion, which the Egyptians associated with Osiris, the god of the afterlife. Others align with stars that were considered eternal, stars that never set below the horizon. These eternal stars were very important to Egyptian belief. They were seen as symbols of immortality, lights that never disappeared, always present in the sky. Some texts describe the soul of the pharaoh traveling to these stars after death, becoming part of the eternal order of the universe. Inside the pyramids, small shafts were built at angles that seemed to point toward these same regions of the sky. For a long time, no one knew why these shafts existed. They are too narrow to walk through, and they do not lead outside in a simple way. But when their angles were measured, researchers noticed that they matched the positions of certain stars as they appeared thousands of years ago. This does not prove the pyramids were built for astronomical reasons, but it suggests the builders were thinking about the sky when they designed them. And this is one of the most unusual things about Egyptian architecture. The buildings were not only placed on the earth, they were connected to the heavens. Some researchers believe the Egyptians saw the world as a reflection of the sky, a kind of mirror where the same patterns existed above and below. If the stars moved in a certain way, the structures on Earth should follow the same order. By building in harmony with the sky, they believed they were keeping the universe in balance. This idea may explain why their monuments feel so precise. They were not only building for beauty, they were building to match something. Another strange detail appears when we look at how long Egyptian civilization lasted without completely losing its identity. For more than 3,000 years, the same symbols, the same gods, and the same styles of building continued to appear. Rulers changed, cities changed, and enemies came and went, but the basic structure of the culture remained almost the same. This is unusual. Most civilizations change quickly over time, but Egypt seemed to hold on to its traditions with incredible consistency. One reason may be the role of the priesthood. The priests were responsible for preserving knowledge, copying texts, teaching the next generation, and making sure rituals were performed exactly the same way they always had been. They believed that if the old ways were forgotten, the balance of the world could be broken. Because of this, knowledge was not meant to change easily. It was meant to be protected. Some texts even suggest that certain teachings were only given to a small group of people, passed down quietly from teacher to student. These teachings were considered sacred, not meant for everyone, and not meant to be written openly. This idea has led to many theories about hidden knowledge in ancient Egypt. Some people believe the priests understood things about mathematics, sound, or natural forces that were never fully recorded. Others think they may have preserved stories from a much older time, memories of events that happened long before the pyramids were built. There are also strange references in ancient writings to earlier ages, times when the world was different, when the gods walked among humans, and when great disasters changed the land. These stories appear in different forms, sometimes as myths, sometimes as lists of rulers who lived for incredibly long periods, sometimes as fragments of texts that seem to describe events we cannot place in the known timeline. Historians usually see these as symbolic, but the fact that the Egyptians themselves believed their history went back much further than their recorded kings is interesting. It suggests they saw themselves as part of a much longer story, and that idea connects to the feeling many people get when they look at Egypt today. The monuments do not feel like the beginning of something. They feel like the remains of something older. Even the desert itself seems to hide things. Sand moves slowly, covering and uncovering structures over centuries. There are places where temples were buried for generations before being found again. There may be others that have not been discovered yet. Modern technology has started to reveal shapes beneath the ground, hints of walls, tunnels, and rooms that no one has entered in thousands of years. Each new discovery adds to the sense that Egypt is not finished, that the story is still incomplete. And that may be why the civilization continues to hold such a strong place in the imagination. It is not only the size of the pyramids, it is not only the age of the temples, it is the feeling that something is still hidden, something buried in the sand, something carved into stone, something written in symbols we only partly understand. And as we keep going tonight, we are going to follow that feeling even further, because some of the strangest ideas connected to ancient Egypt are not about what they built, but about what they believed the universe itself really was. When we begin to look at what the Egyptians believed about the universe itself, the mystery becomes even deeper. Their writings, their carvings, and their temples all suggest that they did not see reality as simple or permanent. They believed the world existed in layers, visible and invisible at the same time, and that what we see with our eyes is only part of what is actually there. This idea appears in many of their symbols. The Egyptians often showed gods with human bodies and animal heads, not because they thought the gods literally looked that way, but because they believed different forms could represent different kinds of power. A human body might show intelligence, the head of a bird might show vision, the head of a jackal might show protection, and the head of a falcon might show the ability to move between the earth and the sky. To them, reality was not limited to one shape. The same idea appears in their stories about the creation of the world. In some versions, the universe begins in darkness and water, and from that darkness comes light, order, and structure. The gods do not create everything at once. They bring balance slowly, shaping the world piece by piece, keeping chaos from returning. This belief in balance connects to everything they built. The temples were arranged in careful patterns, the statues were placed in exact positions, and the rituals were performed at precise times. The Egyptians believed that if the order of the world was not maintained, everything could fall back into chaos. Some researchers think this may be why their monuments seem so carefully aligned with the sky. The movements of the stars were seen as part of the same order that held the world together. If the stars moved in perfect cycles, then the structures on Earth should also follow those cycles. In a few temples, the alignment with the sun is so precise that light enters the inner chamber on only 1 or 2 days each year. These days were often connected to important moments, like the beginning of the year, the flooding of the Nile, or the birthday of a ruler. To create something like that, the builders would have needed to watch the sky for many years, recording exactly where the sun appeared on the horizon at different times. They would have needed to understand how the Earth moves, even if they did not describe it the way modern science does. This careful observation makes some people wonder if the Egyptians had knowledge that was more advanced than we usually assume, knowledge that may have been passed down from an earlier time. There is also the strange idea that appears in some Egyptian texts that the world goes through great cycles, periods of order, followed by periods of destruction, followed by renewal. In these stories, civilizations rise, fall, and rise again, and knowledge can be lost and then found again in a later age. This idea sounds very different from the way history is usually taught today, but it appears in many ancient cultures, not only in Egypt. Stories of floods, lost lands, and forgotten ages show up in different parts of the world, often with similar details. Because of this, some researchers believe it is possible that human civilization is older than we think, and that the Egyptians may have preserved memories of a time before the history we know. Whether that is true or not, the Egyptians themselves clearly believed that the past was important and that knowledge had to be protected so it would not disappear. This belief can be seen in the way they wrote on stone instead of materials that would decay. Papyrus was used for everyday writing, but important texts were carved into walls, columns, and statues. They wanted their words to last, even if thousands of years passed. In some temples, there are rooms that seem to have been used for storing scrolls and records. Ancient writers described collections of writings kept by priests, containing knowledge about the stars, the land, medicine, and rituals. Very little of this material has survived, but the references to it appear often enough to suggest that large libraries once existed. One of the most famous stories connected to Egypt is the idea of a hidden archive, sometimes called the Hall of Records, where ancient knowledge was stored. Different versions of the story place it in different locations, sometimes beneath the pyramids, sometimes near the Sphinx, sometimes inside secret chambers that have never been opened. There is no clear proof that such a place exists, but the idea continues to appear because of the way Egyptian culture treated knowledge as something sacred, something that had to be protected. Another strange detail is how often Egyptian symbols seem to describe ideas that sound surprisingly modern. Some carvings show waves, circles, and patterns that resemble diagrams rather than pictures. Some texts describe the universe as something that began in darkness and expanded into order. Others describe the soul as something that can leave the body and travel through different realms. These ideas can be explained as religion or philosophy, but the language sometimes feels closer to science than to myth, as if the Egyptians were trying to describe things they observed but did not have the words we use today. Even their idea of the afterlife sounds less like a simple heaven and more like a journey through different stages, each one requiring knowledge, preparation, and understanding. This makes the entire civilization feel different from what we expect from the ancient world. They were not only building monuments, they were building systems of meaning. They were not only writing stories, they were recording beliefs about how the universe works. And because of that, their temples and pyramids sometimes feel less like ruins and more like pieces of a puzzle. A puzzle where the shapes are still there, the lines are still there, but the full picture is not completely clear. As we continue tonight, we are going to move even deeper into the strangest part of Egyptian history. The idea that their civilization may have been connected to something that existed before them, something they believed was real, something they tried to remember, even when the details had already begun to fade. Because some of the oldest Egyptian stories do not talk about the future. They talk about a time that came before everything else. As we go further into the oldest stories connected to ancient Egypt, we begin to reach a part of their history that feels less like recorded events and more like memories from a time that is difficult to place. The Egyptians kept king lists, long records of rulers that stretched far back into the past. But some of these lists include names that do not fit easily into the timeline we usually learn about. In certain ancient writings, there are references to rulers who lived long before the first known pharaohs, rulers described not simply as kings, but as divine beings, or as figures who existed in a time when the world was different. These rulers were sometimes said to have lived for hundreds or even thousands of years, far longer than any human lifetime. Modern historians usually see these numbers as symbolic, not literal. They may represent long periods of time, or they may be part of mythology meant to show that the earliest age was closer to the gods. But the fact that the Egyptians themselves believed their history stretched back much further than their recorded dynasties is interesting. It suggests that they saw their civilization as the continuation of something older, not the beginning. One of the texts often discussed in this context is known today as the Turin King List, a damaged papyrus that contains the names of many rulers of Egypt. Some parts of the list include names that are not well understood, and in certain sections, the rulers are described in ways that sound more legendary than historical. There are also writings from later historians who described Egyptian traditions about a time before the known kings, when the land was ruled by gods, followed by beings sometimes called demigods, and only after that by human rulers. These stories appear in different forms, but they all carry the same idea. There was an earlier age, an age of greater knowledge, an age that ended before the history we remember. This idea is not unique to Egypt. Similar stories appear in other ancient cultures, tales of lost lands, floods, and civilizations that disappeared. Some people believe these stories may be connected to real events that happened at the end of the last ice age, when the climate changed, sea levels rose, and many parts of the world were flooded. If early human settlements existed near the coasts, as many did, they could have been covered by water thousands of years ago, leaving very little evidence behind. Only the knowledge carried by survivors would remain, passed down through stories, symbols, and traditions. Some researchers believe Egypt may have been one of the places where this knowledge was preserved. The Nile Valley would have been a natural place for people to gather after a disaster. The river provided water, fertile soil, and a stable environment where a civilization could grow again. If people arrived there carrying stories from an earlier time, those stories might have become part of Egyptian belief. This could explain why the Egyptians placed so much importance on memory, tradition, and preserving the past. They believed the first knowledge was the most important and that it had to be protected so it would not be lost again. There are also strange references in Egyptian writings to sacred objects and hidden teachings that were kept inside temples. These teachings were not meant for everyone. Only certain priests were allowed to learn them, and they were passed down carefully from one generation to the next. Some texts even suggest that knowledge could be dangerous if used incorrectly, and that it had to be guarded so it would not fall into the wrong hands. This idea appears in stories about books of Thoth, writings said to contain powerful wisdom about the universe, but hidden so that only those who were prepared could understand them. Whether these stories are symbolic or based on real traditions, they show that the Egyptians believed knowledge itself had power, and that losing it could change the world. Another mystery appears when we look at how suddenly Egyptian civilization seems to appear in the historical record. Within a relatively short time, we see writing, organized government, large stone buildings, and complex religion all existing together. Usually these things develop slowly over many generations. But in Egypt, the earliest dynasties already show a high level of organization, as if the foundations were already there before the first records we have. Some researchers believe this could mean the beginning of Egyptian civilization happened earlier than the dates usually given, or that the people who built the first monuments already had knowledge passed down from an earlier culture. There are also strange similarities between Egypt and other ancient civilizations. Pyramids appear not only in Egypt, but in different parts of the world. Stories about floods appear in many cultures. Symbols connected to the sun, the stars, and cycles of time show up again and again in places that had no contact with each other, at least as far as we know. This does not prove there was a single lost civilization, but it keeps the question open. Why do so many ancient cultures speak about earlier ages? Why do so many of them describe knowledge coming from the past? Why do so many monuments seem built to last far longer than the people who made them? When you look at Egypt with these questions in mind, the pyramids, the temples, and the carvings begin to feel less like the start of history, and more like something left behind, something preserved, something meant to survive long after the original builders were gone. Even the desert itself seems to protect these secrets. Sand moves slowly, covering ruins, hiding walls, filling tunnels, and keeping things hidden until the right moment. There may be places in Egypt that have never been uncovered, structures buried so deeply that no one today knows they exist. Modern technology has begun to reveal shapes beneath the ground, hints of rooms, passages, and foundations that do not appear on the surface. Each discovery adds to the feeling that the story of Egypt is not finished. There may still be parts we have not seen, parts we have not understood, parts that were meant to stay hidden until a later time. And as we continue tonight, we are going to move toward the final pieces of this strange puzzle, looking at the idea that the Egyptians were not only recording the past, but trying to send a message into the future. As we move closer to the final parts of this quiet journey through ancient Egypt, the feeling that keeps returning is the idea that the Egyptians were always thinking about time in a very different way than we do today. They did not see themselves as living only in the present. They saw themselves as part of a chain that stretched far into the past and far into the future, and they believed it was their responsibility to keep that chain from breaking. This belief can be seen in the way they built their monuments to last for thousands of years, not just for the lifetime of one ruler. It can be seen in the way they repeated the same symbols over and over again, as if the meaning behind them was too important to ever change. And it can be seen in the way they wrote about earlier ages, earlier rulers, and earlier knowledge, always suggesting that the beginning of the story was much older than the part we can clearly see. One of the most interesting ideas that appears in Egyptian tradition is that knowledge was not created once, but rediscovered again and again. There are texts that speak about teachings being lost and then found again, about wisdom being hidden during times of chaos and brought back during times of order. This fits with their belief that the universe moves in cycles. Just as the sun rises and sets, just as the Nile floods and then returns to its banks, civilizations could also rise, fall, and rise again. If that was true, then the Egyptians may have believed they were not the first advanced culture, but the ones who came after another, trying to rebuild what had been lost. This idea also appears in their stories about the gods. In many Egyptian myths, the gods are not distant creators who only appear at the beginning. They are rulers who lived on earth, taught humans how to live, and then left, leaving the responsibility of keeping the world in balance to those who came later. Some stories describe a time when the gods themselves ruled Egypt, followed by a time when semi-divine rulers took their place, and only after that came the human kings. Whether these stories are symbolic or based on real traditions, they show that the Egyptians believed their civilization had roots in a much older age. Another detail that adds to this feeling is the way Egyptian priests treated knowledge as something sacred and dangerous at the same time. Certain teachings were not meant to be shared with everyone. They were kept inside temples, written in special texts, and passed down only to those who had been trained to understand them. This idea appears in stories about hidden books, secret chambers, and sacred rooms inside temples, where only a few people were allowed to enter. The knowledge inside these places was believed to be powerful, not because it could control the world in a magical way, but because it explained how the world worked. To the Egyptians, understanding the order of the universe meant having responsibility for it. If the knowledge was lost, the balance could be lost as well. This belief may help explain why they built so many structures in stone instead of materials that would decay. Papyrus could be burned, wood could rot, cloth could disappear, but stone could survive for thousands of years. If they wanted their knowledge to last, carving it into rock was the safest way. Even the locations of their monuments sometimes seemed chosen for permanence. The pyramids were built on solid ground, far from the river, in a place where flooding would not destroy them. The temples were often placed on high ground, where the sand could cover them but not easily break them. It feels as if the builders expected that time would pass, that kingdoms would fall, and that the only way to speak to the future was to leave messages that could survive without being protected. Another strange detail is how often Egyptian symbols seem to represent ideas about the universe that sound surprisingly modern. The idea that everything is connected, the idea that balance keeps the world stable, the idea that cycles repeat over very long periods of time. These are ideas that appear in both ancient belief and modern science, even though the language used to describe them is very different. Some carvings show circles inside circles, waves, and patterns that look almost like diagrams rather than pictures. Some texts describe creation as something that begins in darkness and expands into order, which sounds very different from the simple stories we usually expect from ancient cultures. Of course, this does not mean the Egyptians had modern science, but it does show that they were thinking about the nature of the world in ways that were more complex than we sometimes imagine. They were asking questions about where everything came from, about why the stars move the way they do, about what happens after death, about how long the world has existed. And instead of writing those ideas in books that might be lost, they built them into their temples, their pyramids, and their carvings. This is why their monuments sometimes feel like more than buildings. They feel like records written in stone instead of words. Records meant to survive even if the language was forgotten. Records that could still be read by people thousands of years later, even if the meaning was not completely clear. And when you look at Egypt this way, it starts to feel less like a civilization that simply lived and disappeared, and more like one that expected the future to come looking for answers. The pyramids are still standing. The Sphinx is still watching the horizon. The temples still hold their carvings in silence, and the questions they left behind are still here. Who built the first monuments? How much knowledge was lost before history began? Why did the Egyptians believe their wisdom came from an earlier age? We may never know the full answers, but the fact that the questions are still here after thousands of years may be exactly what the builders wanted. Because the more we look, the more we measure, the more we dig into the sand, the more it feels like ancient Egypt was not only trying to understand the past, it was trying to make sure the future would never forget. As we get closer to the end of our journey through the secrets of ancient Egypt, one idea keeps returning again and again. The feeling that the people who built these monuments were not only thinking about their own time, but about time itself. They seem to believe that the world moves through long ages, that knowledge can disappear, and that the only way to keep it alive is to leave something behind that cannot easily be destroyed. This may be why so much of Egyptian culture was built around permanence. Stone instead of wood. Carvings instead of paint alone. Massive structures instead of temporary ones. Even the way they chose the desert as the place for their greatest monuments may have been part of this idea. The desert changes slowly. Sand can cover things, but it often protects them at the same time. A building left in a forest might rot, a building near water might wash away, but a building in the dry heat of Egypt can survive for thousands of years. It almost feels as if the builders understood that the future would forget them, and they wanted to make sure something would remain. Another strange detail about Egyptian civilization is how much attention they gave to orientation and direction. Many temples face the same way. Many pyramids are aligned with the cardinal directions. The entrances, the corridors, and even the statues often point in very specific directions, as if the position of each structure mattered as much as the structure itself. This suggests that the Egyptians believed the world had a natural order that could be measured. North, south, east, and west were not just directions. They were part of the balance of the world. The sky, the earth, and the land of Egypt were connected, and building in the wrong place or the wrong direction might break that connection. This belief may explain why their architecture sometimes feels almost mathematical. The shapes are simple but exact. The angles are consistent. The proportions repeat again and again. It is not only art, it is design based on rules. Some researchers believe these rules were connected to what we now call sacred geometry, the idea that certain shapes and ratios appear in nature again and again, in plants, in crystals, in the movement of planets, and even in the human body. Whether the Egyptians described it this way or not, their buildings often follow proportions that seem carefully chosen. The pyramids, the temples, and even the layout of some cities show patterns that repeat too often to feel completely accidental. It is possible that the builders believed these proportions reflected the structure of the universe itself, and that building in harmony with those patterns would keep the world in balance. Another idea that appears in Egyptian belief is that the universe began in darkness and water, and that order had to be created from chaos. This story appears in different forms, but the meaning is always similar. The world exists because balance is maintained. If balance is lost, chaos returns. This may be why the Egyptians were so careful about rituals. Every ceremony had to be performed exactly the same way. Every symbol had to be drawn correctly. Every word had to be spoken in the right order. It was not only tradition, it was protection. They believed the universe itself depended on keeping the correct order. This way of thinking makes their monuments feel different from the ruins of other civilizations. A temple in Egypt does not feel like it was built only for people to gather. It feels like it was built to hold something in place, something invisible, something connected to the idea that the world must stay balanced. There is also the strange fact that even after Egypt was conquered by other civilizations, many of the old traditions continued. New rulers came, new languages appeared, but the old temples were still respected, the old symbols were still understood, and the old stories were still told. It is as if the culture was stronger than the kings who ruled it. Some people believe this is because Egyptian belief was built on ideas that felt timeless. Ideas about the sky, the earth, life, death, and the cycles of nature. These are things that do not change easily, so the symbols connected to them did not need to change either. Another mystery appears when we think about how much of Egypt may still be hidden. The desert has covered entire cities before. Sandstorms can bury walls, statues, and even large buildings. Over thousands of years, the landscape can change without anyone noticing. Modern technology has started to reveal shapes beneath the ground, hints of structures that have not been uncovered yet. Some surveys have found signs of buried walls near the pyramids, tunnels beneath temple sites, and foundations that do not match the known buildings. Each time something new is found, it reminds us that the Egypt we see today may only be part of what once existed. There could be older structures beneath the ones we know, older carvings beneath the ones we read, older stories beneath the ones we remember. And if the Egyptians themselves believed their civilization came from an earlier age, it makes the mystery even more interesting, because it means the pyramids may not be the beginning. They may be the middle of the story. Even the way Egyptian texts talk about the past gives this feeling. They often speak about earlier times as if they were closer to perfection, closer to the gods, closer to the original order of the world. Later ages are described as weaker, less pure, further away from that beginning. This idea appears in many ancient cultures, the belief that the oldest age was the greatest, and that knowledge slowly fades over time. If the Egyptians believed this, it would explain why they tried so hard to preserve what they had, why they built monuments meant to last forever, and why they filled their temples with symbols that could survive even if the language itself was forgotten. It is almost as if they were leaving instructions for the future. Not clear instructions, not easy instructions, but enough clues that someone, someday, might understand. And as we move into the final part of this journey, we are going to look at the last piece of the mystery, the idea that ancient Egypt may have been built not only to remember the past, but to send a message forward through time. As we move into the final stretch of this slow journey through the secrets of ancient Egypt, the feeling that remains strongest is the sense that this civilization was always looking both backward and forward at the same time. They looked backward toward an age they believed was older and wiser, and forward toward a future they knew would come long after they were gone. This may be why their monuments feel less like celebrations of the present, and more like attempts to speak across time. When we look at the pyramids, the temples, and the statues today, we usually see them as ruins, the remains of something that ended. But the people who built them may not have seen them that way at all. They may have seen them as markers, as anchors, as things that would hold their knowledge in place even if everything else changed. There is something unusual about the way Egyptian structures were designed to survive. The shapes are simple, strong, and stable. The pyramid is one of the most stable shapes that can be built. Its weight pushes downward evenly, making it hard to collapse even after thousands of years. The temples use massive stone blocks, fitted together in ways that allow the structure to stand, even if parts are damaged. This suggests the builders were not only thinking about how to build, but how to build for a very long time. And when you combine that with the way they carved their writings into stone, instead of leaving them only on papyrus, it starts to feel as if they expected that the future would need to read what they left behind. Another detail that adds to this feeling is the way Egyptian symbols seem to carry more than one meaning. A single carving might represent a god, a natural force, a direction, and a moment in time all at once. The same symbol can appear in different places, connected to different stories, but always holding the same basic idea. This makes their writing feel less like simple language and more like a system of codes, something that could still be understood even if the exact words were forgotten. And that may have been the point. If a language disappears, a message written in that language is lost, but a symbol can survive much longer. The Egyptians used pictures, shapes, and patterns that could still be seen even when the meaning became unclear. Thousands of years later, we can still look at those carvings and know they were important, even if we do not always know exactly why. There is also the strange way Egyptian belief connects the world of the living, the world of the dead, and the world of the gods, as if they are all part of the same place. The afterlife was not somewhere far away. It existed alongside the physical world, hidden but connected. This idea appears in their tombs, which were built like small houses, filled with objects from everyday life. It appears in their temples, where statues of gods were treated as if they were living beings. And it appears in their texts, which describe the soul traveling through different realms that exist at the same time, not one after another. To the Egyptians, reality was layered. What you see is only the surface. Behind it is another world, and behind that, another. This way of thinking makes their monuments feel less like buildings and more like doors, places where different parts of existence were meant to meet. Some researchers believe this could explain why certain temples and pyramids were built in very specific locations. The builders may have believed that certain places on Earth were more connected to the sky or more connected to the hidden parts of the world, and that building there would make the connection stronger. Whether that idea is symbolic or literal, it shows how seriously they took the idea of harmony between the earth and the heavens. Another mystery appears when we think about how long Egyptian civilization lasted. For more than 3,000 years, the same basic beliefs continued, the same symbols appeared, and the same stories were told. Even when new rulers came from outside Egypt, many of them adopted Egyptian traditions instead of replacing them. This is very unusual in history. Most civilizations change quickly, but Egypt held on to its identity for a very long time. It is as if the culture itself was designed to resist being forgotten. Some people believe this was intentional, that the priests and scholars of Egypt saw themselves as guardians of knowledge, responsible for keeping the old teachings alive, no matter what happened to the world around them. If that is true, then the pyramids and temples may not only be monuments to kings, they may be monuments to memory. Memory of a time before the pyramids. Memory of knowledge that had to be protected. Memory of an age the Egyptians believed was closer to the beginning of the world. And that idea leads to one last question that has never fully gone away. If the Egyptians believed their wisdom came from an earlier age, then where did that earlier age come from? Was it only myth? Was it only symbolic? Or was there really a time before recorded history when human knowledge was greater than we imagine today? No one knows for certain, but the fact that the Egyptians themselves believed the past was deeper than their own history makes the mystery feel very real, because they were closer to those stories than we are. Closer to the monuments when they were new, closer to the traditions when they were still being taught, closer to the moment when those ideas first appeared. And yet, even they spoke about an age that came before them, an age they could not fully remember, but did not want to forget. In the final part, we are going to slow down even more and let the story come to a quiet ending, looking at why ancient Egypt still feels different from every other civilization and why its secrets continue to feel like they are waiting, even after thousands of years. As we come closer to the end of this long, quiet journey through the secrets of ancient Egypt, the feeling that stays with us the most is not confusion and not even mystery, but something deeper. It is the feeling that this civilization understood how fragile memory can be. They seem to know that time can erase almost anything, cities can disappear, languages can be forgotten, and knowledge can vanish if no one protects it. And because of that, they built in a way that feels almost deliberate, as if they expected the world to change, but wanted something to remain, no matter what happened. When you look at the pyramids today, they do not feel like the work of people who thought only about their own lives. They feel like the work of people who were thinking thousands of years ahead. The stones were placed to last, the shapes were chosen to survive, and the location was selected so the structures would not easily be destroyed by water or weather. Even after thousands of years, the pyramids are still there. Storms passed, kingdoms fell, languages disappeared, but the pyramids stayed. The same is true for the temples. Many of them were buried in sand for centuries, forgotten by the people who lived nearby until they were uncovered again. When they were found, the carvings were still there, the columns were still standing, and the symbols were still clear enough to read. It almost feels as if the desert itself helped protect them, covering them when the world moved on, and revealing them again when the time was right. There is also something unusual about the way Egyptian culture treated the idea of the past. In many civilizations, the future is seen as more important than the past. People try to create something new, something different from what came before. But in Egypt, the oldest traditions were often seen as the most valuable. The first teachings were believed to be the closest to the truth. The earliest knowledge was believed to be the purest. The oldest symbols were believed to hold the greatest power. Because of this, the Egyptians did not try to change their culture quickly. They repeated the same forms, the same rituals, the same designs, over and over again, as if the goal was not to invent something new, but to keep something old from disappearing. This way of thinking makes their civilization feel very different from the modern world. Today, we expect things to change constantly. In Egypt, they expected things to stay the same. And yet, even with all their effort to preserve the past, they still told stories about an age that came before them, an age they believed was closer to the beginning of the world. In some of their traditions, the first rulers were not human at all, but divine beings who brought knowledge to the land. These beings were said to have taught people how to write, how to measure, how to build, and how to live in balance with the world. After them came other rulers, less powerful, but still closer to the original order. Only later came the human kings, whose names we know today. Whether these stories are symbolic or based on real events, they show that the Egyptians believed knowledge could be lost over time, and that their own civilization was part of a much longer history. This idea appears again in the way they talked about cycles. The sun rises and sets. The Nile floods and returns. Life begins and ends, and civilizations rise and fall. If everything moves in cycles, then it would make sense that there were ages before the pyramids, just as there will be ages after them. This belief makes the monuments feel different. They do not feel like the start of the story. They feel like something placed in the middle, something meant to survive while the world changes around it. Even the way Egyptian symbols combine different meanings seems to follow this idea. A single image can represent life, death, the sky, the earth, and the passage of time all at once. It is as if the builders wanted their message to be understood in many ways, so that even if part of the meaning was forgotten, something would still remain. There is also the strange fact that the more we learn about Egypt, the more questions appear instead of fewer. New scans show empty spaces inside pyramids. New digs uncover older walls beneath known temples. New translations reveal texts that are harder to explain than expected. Each discovery feels like opening one door, only to find another behind it. And maybe that is why ancient Egypt continues to hold such a strong place in the imagination. It is not only because the monuments are large. It is not only because they are old. It is because they feel unfinished, as if the story they were meant to tell has not been completely understood yet. When you stand in front of the Sphinx, looking at its face worn by wind and sand, it does not feel like you are looking at something that ended. It feels like you are looking at something that is still waiting. Waiting for someone to understand why it was built. Waiting for someone to understand what the symbols mean. Waiting for someone to understand what the Egyptians believed about the world, and about time, and about the possibility that history goes back much further than we remember. And as we move into the final part, we are going to let the story slow down and simply sit with that feeling for a moment. The feeling that ancient Egypt may not be a mystery because we have not learned enough yet, but because it was meant to remain mysterious for a very long time. And now, as we come to the end of tonight's slow journey through the secrets of ancient Egypt, the desert feels quieter than it did at the beginning. The pyramids are still standing, the temples are still watching the horizon, and the Sphinx still faces the rising sun, just as it has for thousands of years. Nothing in Egypt feels rushed. Nothing feels temporary. Everything feels as if it was made to outlast the people who built it. And maybe that is why this civilization continues to feel different from every other one in history. Most ancient cultures left ruins. Egypt left messages. Not messages written in a way that is easy to read. Not messages that explain themselves clearly, but messages that survive. Messages carved into stone, placed under the desert sky, aligned with the stars, and built so carefully that even after thousands of years they still make us stop and wonder how they were made, why they were made, and what the builders wanted the future to see. The Egyptians believed that time moves in cycles, that knowledge can be lost, and that balance must be protected. They believed the past was closer to the truth, and that the first teachings were the most important. Because of that, they did not try to erase what came before them. They tried to preserve it. They built monuments that could survive floods, storms, and the fall of kingdoms. They carved symbols that could still be seen even when the language was forgotten. They aligned their temples with the sky so the pattern would remain even if the meaning was lost. And now, thousands of years later, those choices worked. We can still see what they left behind. We can still measure it. We can still walk between the stones they placed with their own hands. But the full meaning still feels just out of reach. Maybe the Egyptians knew that would happen. Maybe they understood that the future would not remember everything, and that the best they could do was leave clues. Clues in the shape of a pyramid, clues in the face of the Sphinx, clues in the carvings on temple walls, clues in stories about earlier ages, and lost knowledge and cycles that repeat over and over again. And maybe the reason those clues still feel powerful today is because they were never meant to give simple answers. They were meant to make people ask questions. Who built the first monuments? How much history existed before written records began? Why did the Egyptians believe their wisdom came from an earlier age? And why do their structures still feel so precise, so deliberate, and so difficult to explain even now? We may never know every answer, but the mystery itself has lasted longer than most civilizations ever did. The desert kept its silence, the stones kept their shape, and the sky above Egypt still moves in the same slow patterns the priests once watched thousands of years ago. If you enjoyed this quiet exploration, you can support the channel by subscribing to Sleepy Tin Foil Hat and by leaving a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. I always like seeing how far these late-night journeys travel, and it reminds me that even when we talk about ancient worlds, we're all here together in the present moment. For now, there is nothing you need to figure out, nothing you need to solve. Just let the questions drift away. Let the pyramids fade back into the desert. Let the temples sink back into the sand. Let the stars move slowly across the sky the way they always have. Take a slow breath. Let your shoulders relax. Let your thoughts become quiet. And if you're still awake, there will always be another mystery waiting, another story from the past, another strange piece of history that refuses to be forgotten. But for now, you can rest, sleep well, and good night.